I do believe that if we have faith and if we have courage and if we have, of course, love in every dreams that we want to achieve, we will have it peaceful. So this afternoon, I am going to discuss to all of you on how we are going to protect ourselves from fraud. Let us watch and listen. Why do people commit fraud? Meet Bob. Bob is under pressure because of his personal debt, a gambling problem, and his desire to live the high life. He is also scrambling to meet sales quotas and deliver better numbers to his investors. Bob sees an opportunity to commit fraud. Bob writes and approves checks without any oversight from his bosses. Bob knows no one is looking or paying attention, but he needs to rationalize it to himself. I deserve this. I'm only borrowing a little. I'll pay it back. Together, these three factors lead Bob to commit fraud. Let's learn more about the three factors using the triangle fraud. Most perpetrators are first-time offenders who would not commit other crimes. Rationalizing helps them hide from the dishonest of their acts, such as nobody will get hurt. It's for a good purpose. I am only borrowing the money. I will pay it back. I deserve more. So how are we going to protect ourselves, our organization from fraud? First is creating a positive work environment. Next, providing employee assistance programs. Avoiding undue reliance on any one individual, rotate duties. Separating duties to avoid conflicts. Hiring honest people and training them in fraud awareness. Do not forget that honesty is the best policy. Disseminating a well-understood and respected code of conduct or ethics. Let's watch and listen to Mr. Jonathan Pitts, our speaker this afternoon.
Some jurisdictions rely on audits as the first line of defense against fraud. And audits are great tools and serve a valuable function. But you can't rely solely on audits to detect fraud. In fact, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners found that external audits detected less than 5% of frauds. there are more effective ways to fight fraud. Fraud prevention, done right, requires your entire organization to be aware of the possibility of fraud and what to be on the lookout for. So educating your staff about fraud can be a meaningful investment in the financial and reputational health of your organization. It's important to learn about fraud because fraud can happen across all levels of the organization, and it can have a high financial impact. Since fraud can take many forms, it doesn't just happen in the accounting department. Wherever there is something of value in your organization, it's vulnerable to loss. For example, a procurement official could be creating fake bids to steer contracts to business associates for personal gain. Anywhere there is valuable inventory, there is the possibility of misappropriation. Each organization needs to increase fraud awareness for all employees. Studies show that raising awareness through training, communication, and other means reduce the risk of fraud. And if employees see something that doesn't seem right to them, they should be encouraged to speak up by reporting it to management or going outside to an organization like our office. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has found that this type of reporting by employees identifies 40% of all frauds. So reporting what you see or suspect is vital to preventing and detecting fraud.
How do we deter fraud and lower our risk of injury or loss from fraud? Our first line of defense is establishing effective internal controls that limit opportunities for workplace fraud. As already mentioned, segregating duties and management oversight are key controls. Also vital to fraud deterrence is having an appropriate tone at the top. This means that the culture of the organization and the approach of management from the top down is one that understands fraud risk, will not tolerate fraud in the workplace, and actively seeks to prevent and detect fraud. Other internal controls might include having job rotation to ensure shared responsibility for important activities like payment reconciliation. As a result, a single person is not in total control of an activity. Remember the saying, trust but verify. Frauds are harder to hide when there are strong internal controls that ensure transparent transactions and employee accountability. In addition to internal controls, you should develop a fraud prevention program that includes providing fraud awareness training to employees and conducting audits and reviews, including surprise document reviews and cash counts. A fraud prevention program should also have a way for employees to report fraud. For example, a hotline. An effective program will also ensure employees know how to report potential frauds. When developing internal controls, consider where you may be vulnerable to loss by conducting a fraud risk assessment. You can do this by reviewing your organizational activities to identify weaknesses and how you might be victimized by a fraud scheme. The controls you choose to use should address these risks. For a very simple example, if the file cabinet where you store taxpayer credit card information does not lock, then consider moving the files to a cabinet that locks. The lock is your control. Internal controls can also be developed to address so-called red flags. Red flags are typically indicators that signal potential fraud risks. These red flags should be looked into, but they are not evidence of a fraud. For example, earlier when we discussed the fraud triangle, we mentioned lifestyle changes as a fraud motivator. Say your accounts receivable clerk recently purchased a yacht. It's prudent for you to ensure that your internal controls over the receivables function are adequate and working well. You can also make some inquiries about these noticeable lifestyle changes. According to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, some of the most common red flags of behavioral fraud exhibited by employees are living beyond their means, personal or family financial difficulties, unusually close relationships with a client or vendor, recent changes in family situation like a divorce, and excessive control of their work or an unwillingness to share job duties. These red flags should trigger the organization to, at the very least, ensure that adequate controls are in place for the activities the employee exhibiting red flags is engaged in.
Always remember this. Trust anyone, but do not forget to verify them. Thank you for listening. God bless us all.